My name is Lillian Chung. My maiden name is Lee, so I went from Lillian Lee to Lillian Chung. I was born June 19th, 1969 in Seoul, Korea, and we immigrated when I was 3, and my brother was, I know I was 2 and a half, my brother was about 4 months in the summer, July of 1971. And we first came to the United States to San Diego, California, because my aunt was living there with her husband and family. And so we moved to San Diego. And from San Diego, we kind of just moved up along the coast over the years. My father first came, he came to the United States because his father, he was the eldest son, wanted him to take over the family business, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to do his own thing. So I think my grandfather thought that our time in the United States was just going to be time limited and that we would go back. But we ended up staying because my father just said, he wanted to make his own life in America, and that's why he literally took 2 infants with him. And so my mother was in for a shock because she didn't think that that would be her life when she married my father. So when they first came, he did anything. I remember more stories that he took any job that he could, which included, doing night shifts, picking oranges, working at restaurants. And then finally he met a very nice older mentor, a man that he became close to, who helped him start his own business, which was in furniture manufacturing for restaurants, which is very specific, I know, but yeah, so that's how he started. And then he's very, very entrepreneurial. My father has an idea a week on what to do, so he grew different businesses, and then we ended up just staying and not going back to Korea. My husband, actually, it's a very interesting story. I was in Boston and came home when I was 23 or 24, and I went to my husband's cousin's wedding. So he wasn't even there. He was in Boston at the time. And his mother, my future mother-in-law, went to the wedding because it was her niece. And my mother-in-law and my mother were seated at the same table at the reception. And it was one of those weddings my parents were like, "You're 23, we need to start showing you around." And so I went, and it was in California, and my mother-in-law asked my mother, "Oh, is that your daughter? What does she do?" And my mother said, "Oh, she's in graduate school in Boston." I said, "Oh, my son's in Boston. Can I get her number?" Which my mother promptly gave to her without telling me. So I went back to Boston, and that was when we had answering machines. And about a week later, my husband called and left the longest message on my answering machine. And I thought, what a weirdo. It was like, "Oh, you don't know me, but my mom met your mom." And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it was very weird. And I had my best friend in Chicago listen to the answering machine messages. They sound like a weirdo. It's like, "No, he sounds very nervous, really nice. He has a very deep voice. You should just meet him. He must be a good boy. He's listening to his mother, So I said, okay. So we went on our first date in Boston. So although his mom was in New York, my mom was so it's kind of half set up, half we met, and we just really hit it off. So our first date was, really fun and great, and it was nice to have our own space where we didn't have parents nearby to get to know each other. And so we dated for about 1.5 years and then got engaged. For my father-in-law, he was the youngest of 6 with 5 older sisters. So, there was a very strong patriarchy, in that family. Like, they very much, ascribed to that time, and, it's all about the boy. And so my mother-in-law, of course, had 2 boys back to back. And so she was good. So when I got pregnant with my son, my parents were like, "Oh boy, this family," I'm like, "I can't keep having kids till I have a boy," but we didn't want to find out what his sex was going to be. But my son was born in 1998 in New Jersey, actually, and Livingston, New Jersey. And when the doctor said, it's a boy, I just went, phew, like I don't have to, so even though it seems a little silly, but I do think my father-in-law, he wrote this book of genealogy, and my mother, they did tell me, my father-in-law is the 12th or 13th line, and my husband was the 14th, and you're going to have the 15th. It was very much that messaging. And so, which I find interesting because they are so Americanized in so many ways, because they settled in Rochester, New York, where there were not a lot of Koreans at all. And, they are very, very Americanized, but yet I think what happens is immigrants that leave Korea at a certain time stay very true to those customs and traditions of the time that they left. So yes, and it's really interesting. Like even when we got married, my mother and father-in-law really insisted we do a pibik. And my parents were really surprised because they thought we're in America and we're pretty Americanized and they're Americanized. But my mother-in-law really wanted us to do a traditional like Korean ceremony, and she was very traditional with those kind of things. And so, yes, that legacy, even for my son, he's the eldest grandson on both sides. So not just legacy from my father-in-law, but also from my father. Just, feeling that he's the firstborn grandson. Because my husband was so Americanized, we really both raised our children more American in the sense of the day-to-day. But we tried to pull out things that we thought were really important for them to know about our culture and traditions. And even the whether it's, having myeokguk for your birthday and having tteokguk on New Year's Day and sebae, like all those traditions we still do with our children and with our in-laws and my parents. Even right down to the first job you have, your first paycheck, you should get a gift for, so both my kids, when they got their different summer jobs, the first thing they would do is take my parents out to dinner, things like that. So I feel like there are just certain ways my husband and I really both, appreciate there are some beautiful things about our culture that we really want to, that are rooted in respect and rooted in, just family. So, we try to incorporate that as much as we can in our parenting. I guess I would want to be remembered as a good mother and a good wife and daughter and daughter-in-law and friend, that I loved them unconditionally and supported them unconditionally and was their greatest cheerleader and, encouraged them. And, that I think mostly related to personal rather than professional. I don't really think of myself like trying to leave this legacy of, I was this amazing psychologist and I wrote books and I changed lives, and I don't really think in terms of that, and I don't know if it's because I'm just not that ambitious, but really more my legacy I think will be my children and my children's children and hopefully so on. I actually do really want to pass on my faith to them. The seeds were planted long ago, but as typical teenagers in high school, college students, it's hard for them to, really commit to that part of their lives, and I'm praying that they do. And so that's something I would like to, pass on to them, that is something that despite who you are, where you go, that if you have that inner faith and, that a true belief that you are just a very small, your time here on earth is very short, and the things you do are really kind of meaningless. So at the end of the day, you really have to have that faith that you are here for this short time for a reason, and to find your purpose, and to really fulfill that purpose the best that you can. My name is Lillian Chung, and this is my Korean American story.